right, and welcome. This is Raul. This time around, we're going to be talking about a module made by Doepfer that's called the A114 ring mod right here. Its primary purpose is for processing audio. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what the ports here do and then going straight into a demo, as there is not, for the most part, too much to talk about except for what exactly we're going to feed in here. So there are two ports where you can feed audio into here. One is labeled the X in, and the other is labeled the Y in. Now, you can feed any type of audio that you would like to into these X and Y ports. It can be an oscillator. That's the type of audio that we're going to be using today. But you could also feed a vocal track. You could feed an MP3 player, bass guitar, any kind of external signal into either one of these ports here. And what this module is going to do is it's going to take the incoming signals and it's going to multiply them together. And then that product is then sent out the XY here and goes to whatever output source that you want to send it to. So for instance here we're going to feed it to the mixer at input 1, and we're going to hear what that sounds like shortly. The only other thing that's kind of important to mention about this is it's going to be a very different type of sound. It is going to be primarily, for lack of a better word, harsh. A lot of the sounds or descriptions that are used to talk about these types of sounds, ring mod sounds, is, creates bell-like sounds, alien, very harmonic rich, that kind of thing. And the reason for that is because it actually creates sidebands as two audio sources go in, and then those sidebands is what makes it sort of a harsh sound. So we'll hear some of that here shortly. So let's go ahead and start out by just using a simple type wave. A wave we've heard before if we watched any of the A110 demos. And we're going to actually listen to it dry before we go into the ring mod, just so we know what we're dealing with here. So we're going to listen to our sine wave. Here we go. Here's our sine wave. There is our sine wave. And for starting out, I actually have these oscillators for the most part tuned almost identically. So they're both in the same range, and I have the amount of tune offset set to the same amount as well. So if we want to hear that second sine wave, just so we can hear if they're in tune, patch it in there. And there we go. So you can hear both of them sound very similar together. One of them might be overdriving my mixer a little bit. But those are our dry sine waves. And they're nice in their own right. But let's take some of these into our ring mod and see what we can do with this. So we're going to start by taking sine wave from our second VCO here, and we're going to actually feed this into our X in. So that's going to be our first audio source. And then we're going to take our second sine wave and go into our Y in here. There we go. And then we're going to go from our XY out right into our input. There we go. There we are. So we got our sine waves both feeding into there. Level's about the mid-level. And I chose to start out this way just so I could show you some of the subtle changes, because it's not necessarily the most detectable thing in the world, but because they're exactly in tune for the most part. But watch what happens if I just adjust the tune of one of the oscillators off ever so slightly. My ring mod sound starts to change a little bit. And I start to get a little bit more of a harsh, kind of abrasive type sound going on there. Okay? So, that's with them in the same octave. So, with one of these oscillators, I'm going to actually switch one down, one octave. So, here we go with that. I'm going to actually switch number one. So we have one the center position and one octave down. Now I'm going to go one more octave down into that position and just attune a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to flip back to the center. And there you can really hear, because it's slightly off tune there, about, let's see, about six semitones off, approximately. And there you can definitely hear a big change. So like if I were to bring that back down to where they're in tune, you can hear a little bit of harshness, but it's not quite what you hear about there. Okay, so let's go in the other direction. So I'm going to go one octave up, and there we really start to hear the kind of clangorous, bell-like type sound that we expect from a ring modulator. And here again, some subtle changes to this. I can bring my tune knob a little bit down. This is just with two sine waves. And then I can even go into the +2 position over here. There we go. I can adjust my tune a little bit. This one at the +2 position, I'm going to actually start adjusting a little bit of our oscillator that's feeding into the X over here, and I'm going to bring that one down an octave, just so we can hear what the change sounds like and see how it differs from what we had prior. So now our oscillators are fairly wide apart. This one's in the +2 range, and this one's in the -1 range. So if I go even farther, it sort of starts to go down to somewhat of a whisper. And of course I can try to make that a little more subtle by adjusting the tune on one of my oscillators. I can even bring up back to the center position, keeping this one where it is. I can bring it up closer to this one, and it definitely is more pronounced in the higher octaves. At least for this example it is. So that's just a basic example of two sine waves going into a ring mod and what the output then sounds like going into a mixer. We will get into a little bit more complex demos here shortly, but I just kind of wanted to give an impression of what's happening here when we're inserting two audio signals. So since we did a sine wave, now let's move on to something a little bit different. Let's actually try mixing up a little bit of waves here. So we're going to start with a saw, and we're going to go into our XN. There we go. And then we're going to take a sine wave from the second one. And before I actually jump in there, I'm going to make sure they're kind of set both to the 0 range. There we go. Now I'm patching into my sine wave on my second oscillator, and I'm going into my YN. Here we go. Now you will definitely get more pronounced effects by using different waveforms. You know, sine and saw, or square and sine, or, you know, as long as they're different waveforms, the effect tends to be more pronounced, at least in my experience. So here, let me try and start them out by getting them to be tuned around the same range. And then I'm just going to jump up an octave. Here, I can make the change a little more subtle by going and adjusting my tune dial until I arrive at a timbre that I'm fairly comfortable with. Okay, so that's a saw wave and a sine wave. So let's replace our saw wave with a square wave. Here we go, square wave. That's in our XN. YN is actually our sine wave. Okay. And then from here, if you want a little bit of variety, you can actually adjust the pulse width since we are going out from a square wave. Oh, pulse width. I have two ways that I can sort of adjust the subtlety of this effect here when I'm using a square wave. I can adjust the pulse width of the square wave going out, or I can adjust the tune dial. Or I can change the range as I was prior, go up into the higher octaves. Something like that. I can adjust it all the way until the pulse width is very, very close to inaudible going in. But at that point it becomes a very, very thin sound, as you can hear right there. That to me is sounding very much like a bell. So if I want to change that a little bit, I can go into the higher octaves as well. So that's, we've listened to saw wave mixed with sine wave, square wave mixed with sine wave. Let's try triangle wave mixed with sine wave. Let's go back to center position on both before we jump into that. So there's our triangle wave going into our ring mod, and then sine wave going into ring mod as well. Product coming out into the mixer. Bring my tune down so they're approximately the same tune. Okay. So now at this point I can jump up an octave if I want to. octave up. I can adjust my tune now to make it a little more subtle of a change rather than jumping up an octave. So that's triangle wave mixed with sine wave. Okay, so I'm going to unpatch these. So as far as just mixing basic waveforms together, that's kind of just a basic demonstration. We are going to be kind of moving into a little more complex of a demonstration here in the next segment. We'll be looking at feeding a series of notes into our VCO so that we can trigger it with a melody and then see how that has an effect on our ring mod this next time around. So stay tuned for that. I hope this was a useful little overview. I know we didn't go into too much detail with this one, but I did kind of want to just get the basics of what waveforms sound like going into our ring mod before we do something a little bit more interesting in the next segment. So stay tuned and hope you're here.